From I Am Interchange, it's the Hatch Podcast series. I'm Tate Chamberlin, and today we're somewhere that feels both familiar and overlooked at the same time. Arbor Day Farm in Nebraska City, Nebraska. The kind of place that people call flyover country, a place that many don't think twice about. Even as people who live here are quietly shaping a future the rest of us will eventually feel. I'm talking with Jeff Yost, Chris Harris, and Huascar Medina, three voices who don't see the Heartland as an accident of birth, but a choice, a commitment, a belief that local decisions should be made, well, locally, by the people who actually walk these streets and raise their kids here, and imagine what this place could become. Because if you really want to understand a community, you don't just start with the data, you start with the people who see it up close, teachers, shop owners, artists, local organizers, the ones who understand the rhythms of a place in a way reports never quite reach. The people who can show you what a community is actually like, not just what it looks like on paper. And right now these towns, these counties, are in motion. Old systems giving way to new ones. A moment where risk tolerance suddenly matters, where one wrong move can feel fatal. And the arts, the artists, help us inch forward anyway. They make us brave in ways spreadsheets never will. There's also the quieter story, young people leaving for opportunities somewhere else, communities slowly thinning out, the talent and energy of a place drifting outward like smoke. And the equally powerful force coming behind it, the massive transfer of land and assets from one generation to the next, often to heirs who don't live here anymore. The early signs of a company town future, unless something different takes hold. And somewhere inside all of this, inside the questions about belonging and the future of work, and what makes a place worth staying in, is the story we're following today. Not an invitation, a moment, a snapshot, a look at how the Heartland by choice is writing the next chapter in real time. I'm curious what your relationship to the Heartland is.
Home for me. Heartland's home for me. This is where I found home. This is where I settled. I say this quite a bit. When people ask me where I'm from, I say here. I used to be a little more poetic before and be like, my mother's womb, right? That sticks for some and for others it doesn't. But yeah, been here half my life in Kansas, and we're in Nebraska today, just to clarify. But I've been in Kansas half my life, which is part of Heartland. It's the longest I've lived anywhere. I've become a man here.
I'm a Nebraskan by birth. I'm a Nebraskan by choice. So lived here all of my life. Had a wonderful childhood, and looking back upon it, I had a wonderful childhood because there were huge numbers of people that loved me. So what I wanted for my children, my kids are 25, 22, and 18. What I wanted for my kids was to make sure that they were going to live in a place where lots and lots of people loved them. So my wife and I are committed Nebraskans. We were lucky enough to live in a place where lots and lots of people love our kids. And we try to love lots and lots of other people's kids because that's what makes a better world.
I'm a lifelong Kansan. I'll remain a Kansan by choice as long as I can make that choice. And I grew up in western Kansas in the Dodge City area. And it is, to Huascar's point, it's home. It's where I feel supported. I was in an event last week in New Hampshire. I was on a panel talking about the future of rural philanthropy. And I was asked to make a quick pitch, like, why Kansas? And the two things that stuck out to me immediately in my brain were people are authentic, they want to help, and at the end of the day, it's an amazing place to be from. I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. I don't know if they'll choose to be Kansans for their entire life, but I'm hopeful that my work will help them see that it's a great place to be from.
In Kansas, I believe we continue to do the work even though we're not being watched. Like the work continues to happen in our communities. So, to shed some light in the Heartland, that there is work being done here that's important, spread into other communities. I think that's great.
Will you help me identify where the Heartland is? I've heard Illinois is except Chicago. Where are these borders of the Heartland?
Wow, that's like coming to Kansas City and asking someone what's their favorite barbecue. Like, it's a great way to get in an argument. Like, when I hear the term the Heartland, I obviously am biased toward Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, Iowa. I think of the Midwest and the upper Midwest. I think even down into parts of the South. I don't know if I could define that. Like, I could probably draw some borders. The question that I always think about is the Heartland as a geography versus the Heartland as a concept. Like, the word heart almost has a moral connotation to it. And is that healthy or unhealthy? What do people around the country think when they say this is the Heartland? Are we coming across as having some perceived value or a set of values that others don't? I don't know. I could see people having difficulty with that term. Now, I always interpret it at the Heartland meaning the middle, like the middle of the country geographically, but it might mean something else to other people.
What about you, Jeff? What's the Heartland for you?
So it's what Chris said. It's the northern Great Plains. It's the northern Midwest. I would love to think of the Heartland in fairly inclusive terms. So I would hope the Heartland could continue to get bigger.
Just bigger, like the entire country, maybe? Be the Heartland?
You can be part of it if you want to be part of it. Part of what we always forget is we can't make anybody do anything. All we can do is motivate and inspire people to want to be with us. So what can the Heartland do to attract people to want to be with us?
With the Heartland, there seem to be a lot of stereotypes. And the main one that I can think of is just called flyover country. Can we dig into that? Why is it flyover country? And maybe a couple of the stereotypes that maybe the Heartland has?
What are they saying when they say flyover country? They're saying someone who's saying that and meaning it in a negative way. We might say flyover country in like a kind of a boastful way. And there's probably something under that too. But they're also saying it's not worth stopping for. I'm going to leave New York and I'm going to land in LA, and there's nothing of value in between. And we know from this region that's not true. And Huascar, you said like Kansans do the work, even if they won't get credit for it, even if they won't get seen for it. And that's probably true in Nebraska too. And there are a lot of other stereotypes that like are baked into that, like that the region is unchanging, or the region is no longer economically viable, or demographically it's out of sync with the rest of the country and all white. And that's not true. None of that's true. All of it's in a state of flux. So I think for me, when I hear someone say it's flyover country, that just is an indicator of lack of curiosity.
I want people to drive through here. I just want to change that whole narrative that the only way to get to a place is to fly over it, or to get to another place is to ignore space. And it's also representative for me in a different way that we're only looking at the furthest distance in this country as representative of places you should be. Because I think all the nuances here, we're flying over nuance too, right? Like we're flying over that as well when we have these conversations this way.
Yep.
So I'm thinking about flyover country as an old narrative, maybe a narrative from the 20th century. And it seems to me that for all of the awfulness of the COVID pandemic, there were just a couple silver linings. And one of the silver linings was I've been trying to help people understand the potential of remote work for decades. And COVID did in 20 months what I'd tried to work on for 20 years. COVID was just absolute proof of concept for remote work. So my brother and his partner restored an old Victorian mansion in my little hometown of Red Cloud. They live in New York City. About 2 weeks into the pandemic, they just got in a rental car and drove to Red Cloud because things in New York were just awful. And their assumption was they were going to be in Red Cloud for 6 or 8 weeks. They both did their global jobs from Red Cloud, Nebraska, population 968, for 2 years. One of them is the Deputy General Counsel for Sony Music. One of them is a private bank for Deutsche Bank. These are big jobs. This requires incredible connectivity. That's proof of concept that today we can now live and work wherever we choose to live and work. So I think flyover country is really just a saying that we used to say that probably isn't going to get said anymore.
This part of the country had a trend of depopulation for a long time. And a lot of communities have thought about how do we get people back. And it's always struck me as that's the wrong question to ask, or the wrong goal. It's like, how do we build communities that people want to live and work in? And we'll get the people that want to choose to be there. That's economic viability. That's the way to build the rural community people want to be a part of 30 years from now.
What kind of projects are you working on right now?
At the Nebraska Community Foundation, we're helping community leaders to work on almost any kind of community building and public good project you can imagine. So it might be connected to curriculum enhancement in the K-12 system. It might be helping elders to age in place. It might be helping healthcare systems to have more sustainability. It could be around affordable housing. It could be around early childhood development, people attraction, youth engagement, lots and lots of leadership capacity. And then ultimately, we're helping folks to figure out how to mobilize and use philanthropy in their place as an additional form of creating public good above and beyond what government's already doing. And by community members asking one another, inviting one another into community building that way, it's not only raising money, it's not only putting resources toward the cause, it's actually creating co-creation of the future of that place, these vibrant places that Chris just spoke of.
So I'm at the Kansas Leadership Center, and it feels like we have one grand project that we've been working on for a long time, and it feels more urgent than ever, which is this idea that we teach a much more inclusive form of leadership. When you hear the word leader, you think of an elected official, you think of a CEO, and that is true. Right? There's an element of leadership there, but we teach leadership isn't the position or a position; it's an activity. It's a thing you do. And in fact, it's a really important thing that we need a lot of people to do. If you're going to make progress on really difficult challenges, you need the diversity of perspectives, resources, networks to make it happen, to make that progress happen. And we need a lot of people exercising leadership within their sphere of influence to make that progress. And so we've been teaching this in Kansas, and it's given us a civic kind of language that has been really helpful in a lot of communities. And we do this work around the country and world now. But it feels really urgent because at the root of what we teach, not only that leadership is an activity, but also with it comes loss. And if you're going to work with people in different factions, you're going to have to accept loss to make progress. And that feels lacking right now in the world.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by loss?
Yeah. If you have a certain position on any issue, let's say it's gun control or something like that, pick any issue of the day, you obviously want your position to be the one that quote unquote wins. But that's, in many cases, that may not be the most realistic way to progress toward a healthier outcome. It may mean, and likely will mean, that you will have to work with people that disagree with you, whether in the political arena, the civic arena. And so let me back up. One of the things we say is that leadership is an exercise in disappointing people at a rate that they can accept, that they can absorb. And in one way that disappointment shows up is that even the most hardly fought for positions may not win 100% of the time. And you may have to give up some of that to compromise with someone who disagrees with you. And that's hard work. And you need a framework to be able to work across that divide.
I'm working on, what month is it? It's Suicide Prevention Awareness Month just ended. And I expanded a program that started in Lawrence called Word Save Lives. It's been there for 10 years. Marsha Epstein began the program. It's a non-clinical space, collaborative space with artists, individuals who are grieving from the loss of someone that's completed suicide, individuals who are experiencing suicidal ideation, who work in the field, therapists, individuals from that community of care that they offer. We all come into the same space. We're just trying to remove stigma. So we go to 11 communities this past year, and we've had a few this year that happened again because it's the second year's the hardest, that kind of work. Can you get the funding again? Can you have organizations take up the work on their own? Can you help them advocate for their communities to continue to do these projects? So I've been really thinking about what that model is. Is it us providing templates for grants so they can ask their local community group that funds projects like that? Just really thinking differently about it because one, it's a difficult subject for a lot of people. So trying to remove stigma from that is, I think, the beginning of the conversation. I think it allows for more conversation. It creates a safe space for that conversation. And just being able to say that I'm not okay and no one judge you. And just starting there. That's happening. That just finished, but there's a couple more events are happening throughout the rest of the year. We did 11 of them in 22 days last year. And I went to 8 of them, facilitated those very heavy spots. So I decided to allow those spaces to manifest on their own, hopefully. Some didn't, and I feel a little guilt about that, but I'll work through that. This month is Hispanic Heritage Month, so I have a Hispanic leadership group, and they'll be in Kansas City, so we'll be doing a symposium for 2 days in Kansas City with individuals from the Latino, Latin community, and working on Latina.us. We're doing narrative change. We're doing interviews with policymakers, artists, and regular people, your Theo and your Thea, your uncle and your aunt. How do they feel about something? Want to control our own stories a little more? Have say in how people speak about us? Redefine what Latinidad is for us, specifically for us, not in response to others. So I'm just really into that right now and obsessively about it right now. Make sure I ask the right questions.
I love that you're doing that work. We work closely with the Kansas Health Foundation, and they've been pointing out data that shows that Kansas is ranked 50th in mental health access and outcomes. And if Ty somehow gets DC to become a 51st state, we'd be 51st. It's so needed in the region, and the statistics aren't pretty. And there's a huge challenge with older white men, actually, farmers in the agricultural space. Their suicide rate in this region and across the country is skyrocketing.
That study was American Health, I believe, is the one that did that one. And yeah, the numbers were bad. But the number that really stuck out for me was that the national average is like around 4-something%. And we're like way above that.
Yeah.
Way above that when it comes to people who believe that they might injure themselves. Yeah. And I don't want to make up the number now. I might have wrote it down somewhere. I don't know.
We'll do the research.
6 or 8%. That's at least 2% higher than the national average. And I think about that because my family, we've had experiences with that. I'm a survivor. And I think you have to be able to say that if you're doing that work in those spaces so people know that there's okay on the other side of that. And that's the first way of removing the stigma from that is yes, I've experienced this and I'm here and I'm glad to be here. And to me, that's the real prevention is living a life you're glad to live. So how do we get there?
What areas of the Heartland do you all see growing? What areas do you see shrinking? And why are people coming and going?
Really difficult question, lots of variables. I'll point out a couple and ask these guys to chime in on that as well. Historically, people were leaving small towns in particular, but leaving the Heartland in general for economic opportunity. So one of the things I like to say about the 21st century is our community economic development question has changed from one of jobs to one of why here. With remote work, with lots of flexibility, why do I want to live and work and raise my family in this place? So the people attraction question used to be incredibly and totally tied to employment. And today it's a whole combination of things. But one of the big factors is about place and about the quality of life in this place. And if I'm going to feel a sense of welcoming and authentically feel like I belong. For a long time, we were socializing our kids that their brighter future was someplace else. So that's something that the Nebraska Community Foundation spent a lot of time on over the years, is helping community leaders to revise their narrative to come up with a more positive narrative. Because as we're talking this way, whether a child is 5 or 8 or 12 or 17, they're hearing us. And if we're talking in disparaging ways about the place we supposedly love, those words stick. And for a long time, we celebrated leavers. And even in philanthropy, we were primarily focusing our philanthropy on people that were leaving because most of our philanthropy was actually focused on scholarships. Why don't we spend more time helping stayers and returners and newcomers be in community with us, invite them to become community co-creators with us, invite them to really authentically share how they're feeling, because the thing we know about belonging is people belong when they have their gifts and talents received and appreciated. It's not because somebody told them they belong. It's because we all participated, we all co-created, and that's how we feel a sense of ownership and a sense of belonging. So one of the things that's challenging in Nebraska, and I'm going to go ahead and bring it up here because I think it's a big deal. So even though all of our economic circumstances have changed. To a large extent, Nebraskans, and maybe this is true of the broader Heartland, I'm just going to speak from a Nebraska standpoint here. Nebraskans are friendly, but maybe we don't get a whole lot past friendly for a while. So how do we do a better job of being friendly and doing a better job of being authentically welcoming? Really engendering a sense of belonging, asking people to co-create with us. These are tough sort of societal norms and conventional wisdom to get through, and the only way to get through them is to talk about it and for people to practice what we preach, because we believe that friendliness is more than skin deep, but lots of people that come to visit don't find that's true. So how do we work on not only the perception, but how do we work on the realities of becoming better at building community by creating space for everyone?
What do you think is the reaction that they're processing when an outsider is presented in front of them? What is the message they're receiving?
Again, it all depends upon message and messenger. So again, lots of variables in that. For a long time in rural places, especially rural agricultural places, change has been seen as an enemy. So what are the things we can do to prevent change, to slow the pace of change, to go back to the way things were? What we know about the 21st century is change is moving at this extraordinarily rapid pace. And change is just going to run over us if we're not doing things to adapt and grow and become more open and generative about what's possible, because all of this change has enormous benefit in it. Nonetheless, it's change.
So if we think of Heartland as largely characterized by a rural identity, I know there are large urban centers in the Heartland, but if we look at the rural aspect of it, and I was talking with Jeff about this last night, actually, over dinner, and I think this is why change is hard, is that like when a lot of the conversation around rural is nostalgic, deeply nostalgic, and like romanticizing what was. Like that's how it exists in our popular culture, that it is it's harkening back to something that was, and we're not quite there anymore. And I've worked in rural development a lot, helping support rural entrepreneurs, rural communities. And one of the most counterproductive things I've always observed is so many of the conversations are bent toward how can we restore that? How can we restore what was? I think communities that are doing well across this region are embracing that, like, change is a tool that can serve them in so many great ways. And it's a really nuanced answer as to the population trends. It's different in pockets all over. So I was born in Dodge City, Kansas, which is in far southwest Kansas. And it's a rural community. There are 3 communities out there: Liberal, Kansas, Garden City, Kansas, and Dodge City. Each one is about 30,000 people, and really far from any major metro areas. Wichita will probably be the closest. And these 3 communities are actually counter to the narrative that like Western Kansas is depopulating. These communities have grown a lot, and they've diversified to do that because these communities are built on agriculture, specifically the meatpacking industry. And they're in Garden City, Dodge City as well. There are more than 20 languages spoken in the high school in a community of 30,000 people. And I think let's name the elephant in the room. There's that element at play, which is that if you want to restore what was, that's never going to happen. The answer is to be welcoming to a lot of people that are going to be different from who was there before. And that's not an easy thing for some communities to get their arms around, but it's really powerful. Has been in that part of the country, or of the state. Parts of Iowa have diversified, and it's transformed their communities.
I always wonder about that feeling of something disappearing. And are we processing that? What mechanism is in place to say goodbye to something that's no longer there? Because now we're dealing with someone's longing, and then we're also dealing with someone's want to belong in the same place. It's happening at the same time. Someone wants to belong to that place. The other person thinks that place is disappearing at the same time. That's to me like a conversation.
I think you're right. And that's probably a form of that loss we were talking about. Like, to make progress, you're going to have to accept that it's going to look different. There's going to be some loss that comes with it. To your question, I don't think there is. We have those conversations. At least I haven't seen it.
We've tried to have conversations with community leaders about grief is something that has to be processed, and it has to be processed over a period of time, and we generally know what the sequence of grieving is. Not exactly, but we know quite a bit about that. So part of it is just the willingness to name it, to have conversations about it, and then to talk about, okay, is that something we would like to try to restore? And if so, why? Is there something that could take its place that's potentially better? Or is it fine that it's gone? That's not my call. It's their community. So the only people that can build and sustain community are the people that live and work in it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do believe, and you talked about the Kansas Leadership Center and all the terrific work happening there, it is one of these things that we're going to have to continue to empower community leaders to do in the 21st century, is to process these things as the pace of change continues to get faster.
Yep.
And are we willing to take the time to grieve, to discuss, to think about the different paths forward?
It's interesting about this part of the country, whether in urban and in rural, this is a part of the country that actually has experienced massive change because of economic shifts and upheaval. We were just talking about the depopulation of rural parts of this region. That's not people just waking up one day and saying, I have a lovely life here in Kansas and Nebraska or eastern Colorado, and now I'm going to go to California and pay 3 times for the same house. They did that because the economies of scale shifted in agriculture, and you didn't need as many people to do the same amount of work. And when you have a largely extractive economy built on one sector, that immediately changes the stakes and the scale of your community. And in urban parts of the region, from the Midwest, upper Midwest, all the way down into Kansas, like manufacturing, the economies of scale in that and where it's done has shifted so much that the communities just couldn't keep up. And so in a way, it's a lesson, I think, for the rest of the country that economic dynamism and like diversity is really critical. And also the region, in some ways, has had a 30-year head start in responding to it. They've had to reinvent what we do and how we do it. But the work's not done. We're going to have to get faster because change is going to continue.
And I think the other thing we can absolutely have a conversation about is demographic renewal doesn't necessarily mean population growth.
Yeah.
Healthy economies have a certain number of young people, a certain number of working age people, and a certain number of older people. Sorry. Old people's referring to me. So just looking at general population numbers, census to census, it's a very simplistic way to think about not only vitality, but also viability. Because we'll look at something and say, oh, they lost 7% of their population in the last census. It may be that the economic viability of that community is about the same as it was. It depends on who moved in, who moved out,
mm-hmm.
who was born, who passed away. So we're going to need to have more sophisticated conversations than what we're usually using at this point in terms of demographics, economic viability, and then economic vibrancy. So we work in lots of places that have been doing a good job with their demographics, meaning they've been sustaining their demographics for the last few decades. In many of those cases, there's more kids in school. There are more young families in that place. There are more people being civically engaged. There's more entrepreneurship happening in that place. And to me, that's a much better gauge than whether they gained X% of population.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of what's going on with, you referred to dynamism, and that's how I think of dynamism and these multiple variables is what's actually going on in these places. So part of what we want to keep working on in rural places is the opportunity for rural vitality is greater today than it's ever been. And rural America has lots and lots of what America needs. For instance, we work with lots of communities whose school district graduates 100% of their students every year. That's an amazing thing. Work in lots and lots of places where every elder is being cared for in really compassionate and humane ways. What are the things that we're really going to value here versus just some of the gross generalizations that are made about what it means? And it's not that it's not going to be a struggle to figure all of this out in the 21st century. It very much is. But that's true in urban America too. That's just true in America. It's true in the globe. There's more variables than ever. Most of the things we're dealing with these days are pretty darn complex because most of the simple stuff we figure out how to handle. And that's why leadership, communication, active listening, empathy, these become so much more important in the context we're in today, because the answer to most of these community questions is it depends.
Mm-hmm. Yes. We were talking about progress and things moving faster. And I'm thinking about, I heard the quote a couple of times this weekend, progress moves at the speed of trust, or change moves at the speed of trust. And that's a problem if things are moving too fast and we can't build that trust with the communities that we're in, or the communities we're trying to support. That becomes like the part that falls off, right?
Yep.
When the wheel starts turning.
Yep.
Yeah. What's the risk tolerance in making that change? If I understand a lot of the tension is if there's all these farmers and maybe you could frame it as old practices that are comfortable and hard to change out of. But if they make a wrong move, the margins are so tight for them, that decision could be fatal to owning their farm and their family's livelihood. So what's the tolerance that they're feeling?
I think risk tolerance is a great question to talk about here. I think you have to start with the assumption that small places are intimate places. And intimacy means you just know a lot. And not everything you know is perfect. We're human beings. We all have foibles, et cetera, et cetera. We all have a past, all those sorts of things. So a big part of becoming more comfortable with risk is understanding. And so understanding is challenging in this case, especially as we move into sort of things that are more technologically centered. But the more we can have opportunities to experiment with things together, we've made a decision, we're going to experiment with this, and then we're going to see how it works out. And then having that leadership capacity, having those leader-full communities who are constantly reinforcing for people, look, we're learning. Our job here isn't to judge. Our job here is to learn. And we're going to be able to create a greater risk tolerance for other experimentation if we practice. So one of the things I'm happy to talk about it when we get to it is the petri dishes that the Nebraska Community Foundation Network is trying to establish in various places to help them have the opportunity to practice experimenting, to practice taking different risks, to practice the idea of succeeding or failing in different ways. And then most importantly, for then the process, especially when it isn't wildly successful, to be grace-filled and create a sense of forgiveness. Because most entrepreneurs that are successful have failed multiple times before they succeed. Why would that be any different for communities? It's not going to be. It's going to be the same thing. We're going to have to find ways to have sort of communitarian forgiveness as we experiment with the future.
One way to interpret the term risk is that to admit that something is risky is to be vulnerable. And I don't know if we're always that great at being vulnerable in this region. Maybe that's part of one of the root causes of the mental health challenges in the region. We're really kind, really innovative and everything else. And once we make that leap to do something, we pursue it and we work hard at it. And that upfront, here's what's risky about it, being vulnerable about what might go wrong. That's the part that feels hard sometimes in this region. And I was just thinking the other day, I was like, we're really going to need to flip that, because we've been talking in generalities like that the pace of change might accelerate. But here's an example, like what is in most communities, most states, most common outside of retail, most common form or industry for employment is transportation. truck drivers. I always pay attention to truck driving. My dad was a truck driver growing up. And what if all of a sudden that gets automated? What does that do to the viability of middle America or anywhere America? And are we moving fast enough? Are we thinking risky enough to diversify our economies quick enough to absorb that level of systemic change when all of a sudden 30% of the employment base is no longer viable? Like, that's the scale and that's the speed. And we have to think a lot differently about vulnerability and risk to be able to catch up.
Talk to us about how the arts help us to take risk. How the arts help us to be open and work on exactly what Chris is referencing.
I say all the time that, and I say poetry because that's my discipline, that art allows us to share hard truths in soft ways. It is a way to express what you're feeling that is subjective, disarming. Everyone comes into this space with the understanding that we are trying to express something that we don't have a clear definition for, but we do have a clear feeling about. And we're trying to get to a point where we can communicate emotionally in that space. So art allows us to feel in a space, whatever form of poetry or visual art, painting, sculpting, all those forms have a space for feeling, like it's innate in it. And we go there to receive a feeling. Like that's initially why you go to art, because you want to have that experience, that catharsis. So we have an advantage with that because that's an expectation. So you're already coming and opening yourself up and trying to suspend disbelief for that moment. And that's an entry point into those conversations that lead to empathy.
And would you talk to us a little bit about your thoughts around more and more community members becoming a part of an artistic troupe, but people really pursuing their art? And how that may help us with some of these questions around change, risk tolerance. The empathy piece is incredible, and it's okay, how do we take the empathy piece and then make it actionable?
Yes. There's always when you have artists who are producing work, and when I say this from high level, I don't mean they're producing a lot of work. They're very clear in their vision and their expression of it. If they are from a community and they have a sense of community in the space that they're in, they will reflect the love that they have for that community and the work that they're creating. And what I see happening often is artists are leaving their communities because they think there's more financial sustainability somewhere else. And that affects the community in a different way. Because when you take away culture, you're taking away part of that spirit of the community. And the artist is the one that's always conjuring that spirit of the community, always keeping it alive, kind of shaking, making sure things are stirred constantly, because it's always evolving. The community is always evolving and changing. Whether we are capturing it in a written form or visually or in music, it's always changing. And when we stop being in those places and we do not support those witnesses, those enlightened witnesses in their hometowns, what we're losing is a conduit and a voice for the community and the issues that they're facing and their aspirations that they want to attain.
Can we talk a little bit about abundance?
Please, yeah.
I'm really bullish on the future of lots and lots of rural places, if in fact they can think of themselves in new and opportunistic ways. Again, all of the things that are happening really well in lots and lots of places. Every child graduating from high school, every elder being cared for in really compassionate and holistic ways. Everybody having economic opportunity. There's challenge in these places, but there's lots and lots of places that work really well. And lots of people that are living in other places where everything doesn't work really well. So it's never about being perfect. What my field is comparative advantage. And rural places, especially rural places that really can become open and willing to think through lots of different options and think through, oh, yeah, we could think about that community asset in that way instead of how we've historically viewed it. Those are the places that really have the opportunity to be a cool place to live, work, and raise your kids. These are the opportunities that parents want for their children, is the opportunity to not just think about stuff, but think about stuff critically and think about things holistically. And not only find ways to be economically successful, but we know how important it is and how early of an age it happens at, where we learn to trust and love and empathize. And we need to build communities that are nurturing kids to be in those places where they do learn to trust and love and empathize by the time they're 18 months old. So within the context of abundance, one of the things we've done in the Nebraska Community Foundation is actually tried to quantify it. We've known for a long time that with the depopulation that Chris was talking about, that the leading economic indicator was the loss of human capital, but then the lagging economic indicator was what happens to the wealth that the parents put together if the heirs no longer live there. So I'll just use the example of my family in my little hometown, Red Cloud, Nebraska. Just less than 1,000 people, went to kindergarten with 23, graduated with 23. I'm the sixth of 6 children. Only 2 of the 6 continue to live in Red Cloud and Webster County. The other 4 of us are someplace else. So if my parents do what parents typically do, which is take whatever they have and divide it by the number of children they have, then 2/3 of whatever my parents made and accumulated during their lifetimes leaves. So it's not just an out-migration of people, it's also an out-migration of wealth, which is an existential threat in places. Because if things become externally owned as opposed to locally owned, those are called company towns. And we've seen this in mountain communities and other places, and that's not what the Midwest has historically been and not what we want it to be. So one of the things I'm proud to say is my parents are treating our hometown as a 7th child in their estate. So a nice, modest act of thinking about the future of our place. So Nebraska's 1.9 million people. We've been studying this transfer of wealth for a long time. 2 years ago, we updated our most recent study. We think $100 billion is going to transfer from one generation to the next in the next 10 years. And again, Nebraska is 1.9 million people. So these are just massive numbers. In little bitty Red Cloud, Nebraska, that's hundreds of millions of dollars that's going to transfer from one generation to the next just in the next decade. We've actually estimated it out to a 50-year number. The 50-year number in Nebraska is something like $950 billion. So almost $1 trillion. So the key to this is threefold. We're not living in poor communities. We're actually living in wealthy communities.
Yep.
It may be invisible because of our humility. It may be invisible because of the way it's held in real estate, etc., but it's there. So we're living in wealthy communities, not poor communities. The second piece is it's going somewhere. And in places that have experienced significant outmigration over the last several decades, it's going somewhere really fast. So we think in 71 of 93 counties, the peak transfer of wealth is happening right now and in the next 10 years. So we have a call to action to do something about this. The third is we have an opportunity to do something about that. What if 100 families that know and love Red Cloud, Nebraska have done what John and Artis Yost did? That's a game changer, not just economically, but in terms of the psyche of that place, right? Because these aren't intended to be gifts. These are intended to be investments. And people invest in things that they believe in the future of.
Yep.
And that's part of what we're trying to do with philanthropy and the Nebraska Community Foundation is encourage friends and neighbors to talk to their friends and neighbors about how do they co-create the future of their place. And part of the way you co-create the future of your place is to invite people into building it with you. And one of the ways you can build it is with financial resources. So in trying to quantify this abundance, we're not only trying to dispel the nature that we're poor, we're trying to help people understand that there's a difference you could make, and it could be a big difference maker. So I'm going to add in one more piece in terms of how we're trying to create this as a call to action. So this enormous wealth, it's going somewhere. So the Nebraska Community Foundation and all of its affiliated funds the last couple of years have been doing a campaign called 5 to Thrive. And 5 to Thrive is an invitation to every generous Nebraskan to give 5% of their estate back to their hometown or their favorite charitable causes. We're beginning to have lots and lots of Nebraskans respond to that call with the idea that this becomes a new part of our ethos of I've had the opportunity to have this lovely life. I've had the opportunity to raise my children here, and they weren't just raised by me and my partner. They were raised by the community. It takes a village. So the whole idea of people then being willing to pay it forward, not just to their heirs, but to their heirs and their community, that to me is a beautiful form of community building.
There's this nostalgia take me back to restore how life was. And Chris, you said earlier, there's no going back, right? So what does the future of work look like to you in the Heartland? We were talking about truck drivers. That job is probably most likely going away to automation, along with, who knows, with the automation wave that's about to hit. How do you forecast the future of work?
The future is creative for me. So that's always going to be my answer for that.
It actually reminds me of a conversation I had with a colleague once who, I don't want to call him out. He's a good friend, but he studies AI and future of work. And he essentially argued that you can't stop it, right? You can't stop the wave of change in that space. And that his idea was essentially that we'll all be paid a dividend in the form of universal basic income. And we'll instead spend our time in the arts. And I didn't know if that was an aspirational future or if that was dystopian or what, depending on the day, if I was excited about that idea or not. And I have no idea if that's where we'll end up. But I think the answer right now is we have to rapidly diversify. Remote work is honestly one of the first real concrete institutional opportunities for rural communities to really do that. But they have to catch up on infrastructure. Broadband is a key challenge. So a few years ago, the Pew Research Center did a big survey on how people in urban communities and suburban communities and rural communities all perceive each other. And they were asking, how likely would you be to move from an urban community to a rural community? And they found that this is right during COVID, actually. They found that people in urban communities were much more open to the idea of moving to a rural community. And I can't remember how the population sizes, how they define each classification, but the trend was urban folks were much more interested in moving to rural than vice versa. And they asked, what would it take for you to make the switch? And none of them answered with the things that people talk about, tax incentives and things like that. They talked about quality of life things. Mm-hmm. They talked about, can I work there? Can my partner work there? Can I access healthcare? And can I access childcare? And is there culture? If you meet those boxes, some of the questions of future of work will kind of, especially if you can do it remotely, will start to answer some of themselves.
I agree with all those answers. I would just add in, I guess, another big element or possibly a caveat, which is we'll continue to need a huge number of people as educators and caregivers.
Yeah.
And those are really important jobs. And one of the things we need to work on is those being jobs that are more honored. So like in Finland, for instance, being a teacher is one of the most 3 honored professions you can take on. And it's one of the 3 most highly compensated professions in the country.
Very different here.
Right? Very different here. So I'm not suggesting we become Finland. I'm saying what's the lesson we can learn from that? And as the future of work changes, what do we need to continue to really think about is the most honored and revered professions for young people to go into. And my hope is we could continue to create both incentives and a culture that if people choose to go into either education or caregiving, that's really an honored path in many ways.
Who's resisting you?
The Sandman, sleep. That's who's resisting me.
In every community, there are cave people. CAVE is Citizens Against Virtually Everything. And I see lots of community leaders try to convince cave people to be on their side. And I spend lots of time trying to help community leaders to ignore those people. Because there are people that just want to be loud and disruptive, but they're not necessarily going to be co-producers with you. So I'm a big fan of spending your time and energy on all of the people who want to make a difference with you, which is in fact the vast majority of your friends and neighbors, and just to not worry about those other people, that no matter what you do, no matter how well intended it is, you may not get them to your side. What I want to say to them is, that's not on you, that's on them.
Yeah, I'll say sometimes that you can't convince someone to be empathetic. And if they're not going to care, it's not on you to make them care. There's only so far you can go. But I believe there are so many people that do care, but maybe they feel disengaged. So that's the work, to build a structure that reaches that critical mass. And then alongside all that, I think, especially for organizations, we mentioned how the arts are underfunded. I think a lot of nonprofits and organizations that are working in community development, economic development, trying to reinvent that future of the Heartland, they fall into a trap of scarcity mindset. The funding landscape generally is fragmented, too competitive, and not collaborative enough. And there's a whole body of work to be done around fixing that dynamic.
100%. But the real answer is, I'm resisting me. I'm always in my way, and I'm aware of that. I got to figure things out still. I'm always on that journey, but I'm aware of it. So I'm in constant conversation of what I could do differently or better. And sometimes you can't do better, and you got to be okay with that.
Would you choose to be a dictator for a day or trust the slow pace of democracy?
It's like asking Frodo to give up the ring. Like, how long is too long? I have to trust in the slow pace of democracy, because I don't think anyone can truly be a dictator for a day and then give up power. I just don't have faith in that.
I appreciate the expression that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Mm-hmm.
So my answer would be the slow pace of democracy.
I believe wholeheartedly in democracy to this day. No one would dissuade me from that.
Whose reality will rule the future?
One reality is Earth's. The Earth will be fine. It's humanity that's in question. And it's not to get too dark with it, but no matter what, Earth's going to be fine. It'll recover from whatever we do to it. We just may not be around to see it. If I wanted to be a little less dramatic about it, I'd probably say the boldest, the people that moved faster, that found a way to balance being part of a healthy democracy and the loss that we talked about earlier that comes with it, and also moving with urgency. And if we can't do that, then it's going to get difficult.
The reality of adapters and collaborators. Those are the ones.
Ditto. Adapters and collaborators. That's spot on.
What brings you hope?
I'll start. I have the really genuine privilege of observing, witnessing, working with amazing community volunteers in hundreds of places every day. That is just a constant source of hope. There's thousands, millions, tens of millions of people in this country that care very deeply for the next generation, for the future of the planet, for the future of the economy, for equity and inclusion and equality. So on my worst days, I can tap into that and still be really hopeful and opportunistic about the future.
So my undergraduate degree is in history. So I always like to look. I was also the guy that was we're too nostalgic about the past, but I am also very nostalgic about the past. But I think it's the point of studying history is to learn what's possible in the future. And we talk about our challenges like they're more complex than they've ever been. And they are super complex. But we've had a lot of complex problems in the past. Could you imagine if Twitter existed in 1939? The world would seem like it was falling apart, or maybe 1941 is even worse. It would have seemed hopeless. What is going on? But we made progress. We have done amazing things. Humanity has done amazing things, worked through some really terrible things. So that's a predictor of capacity, right? We know we can do really difficult things. The question in my mind is pace, the urgency of it. And what makes me hopeful about that question is that there are a lot of people seeing the problem. Maybe they see it a little bit differently, but everyone's seeing the problem now. When you look at climate change, just look at the storm we had a year and a half ago in Kansas, where we had 100-mile-an-hour winds, just like that, in dust storms that rivaled the Dust Bowl out in western Kansas, or the derecho in Iowa, Nebraska, and the floods. And must have been asleep if you haven't noticed and started connecting the dots. We see the problem.
Mine's really personal. Mine's when my son laughs. Like, it is to hear that type of joy with the knowledge that I have, that things are happening around me, and then I am still able to provide a safe space for him to laugh that freely. It makes me feel that I'm getting at least one thing right that day. And I want to see if I can do that every day.
Heart of the Heartland. Huascar, Chris, Jeff. We're with Hatch in Nebraska City, Nebraska. Thanks so much for being here. It's been awesome.
Thank you.
It has been great.
And that's our episode. Talking with Jeff Yost, Chris Harris, and Huascar Medina. You start to realize that the Heartland isn't a relic or a postcard or some empty stretch between coasts. It's a place in motion, a place trying things, adjusting, taking risks, sometimes small, sometimes enormous, to figure out what comes next. And the questions we touched today: who gets to shape a community, who stays, who leaves, what gets rebuilt, and what gets let go. These aren't Heartland questions, they're everyone's questions. They just show up here first, a little sharper, a little closer to the surface. If there's one thing this conversation makes clear, it's that the future of work, belonging, and possibility doesn't arrive all at once. It starts with people on the ground, artists, organizers, business owners, neighbors, choosing to stay, choosing to build, choosing to care. Dispatch from the Heartland was recorded at Arbor Day Farm in Nebraska City, Nebraska. Thanks for listening. More stories soon. Music for Dispatch from the Heartland is by Gangsta Grass, an electrifying blend of bluegrass and hip-hop that captures the spirit of the Heartland. Stay tuned. Later in this series, we'll delve deeper into Gangsta Grass's story and their unique sound in our full episode. Don't miss it.
Son, rebel no pauses, taking out your forces with a switchblade and a rusty gun. Doing this forever, you've just begun. Don't start none, it won't be none.
It seems now more than ever that we have found ourselves on the cusp of monumental worldwide change. Whether we consider the environment, politics, infrastructure, health, economics, or inequities across a broad swath of social constructs, the consensus is clear and urgent. All is not as it should be. The United Nations, a consortium of 193 member states from around the globe, agrees. In 2015, the UN unanimously adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. These goals call for urgent action and global partnership to secure peace and prosperity for people and the planet, now and into the future.
In alignment with the SDGs, Hatch, a curated network of artists, activists, and entrepreneurs working together to accelerate positive global change, has partnered with I Am Interchange to fuse adventure journalism with experiential design labs to develop innovative solutions to complex global challenges. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to the podcast. If you enjoy it, please subscribe or leave us a rating. This episode was produced by Yara Craner, Susan Karstensen, and me, Tate Chamberlin. A shout out to our media and production team: Jessica Byerly, Darko Sevilla, Jacob Desch, Sean Mackinson, Amin Yarsu, and Zane Giordano. With so much gratitude to the Hatch supporters: Anya Bulis, Steelcase, the Kauffman Foundation, the Gwydion Fund, Envision Equality, the Hatch Volunteers, Board of Directors, Hatch Guardians, and the community who help make this work and mission possible. To learn more about Hatch, visit hatchexperience.org. Building community could not happen without food. And with that, I'd like to thank Whistle Pig Korean, Red Tractor Pizza, and Zocalo Coffee House. Remember, share airtime and don't ruin dinner.